If you asked me to name a language I find particularly strong, my first response would be Spanish. And it turns out I'm not alone in this. This whole line of inquiry began when a Colombian friend of mine mentioned that she never understood why German has this reputation for being an especially strong, harsh-sounding language, because to her, Spanish always seemed to be a much more worthy candidate for the title. And this is particularly interesting because beyond the purely subjective realm, there are actually some indications that we can take to justify our common position, and I'm sure the position of many of you viewers out there, that Spanish is actually a very hard, strong-sounding language. And it's something that, as always, lies in the transition from Latin to modern Spanish, and Portuguese, in fact, it turns out as well. So I think I should probably address the parameters here. There are many things that can make a language sound strong. And of course, you'll know that here, when I'm talking about strong, I'm not attaching any negative connotation to that at all. You know how much I love the Spanish language. I find it strong and exquisitely beautiful at the same time. Those are not at all mutually exclusive qualities. In fact, I think they're often complementary. Rather than addressing all the potential reasons one might consider the Spanish language strong, I want to focus on one particular sound change. You see, I think when we say that a language sounds strong, what we are saying, in part, is that it has an abundance of fricative and voiced consonants. And something very interesting happened in Spanish and Portuguese as they evolved from Latin, and potentially even before, we'll get back to that in a moment, that saw unvoiced consonants become voiced. What I'm specifically referring to is that there seemed to be a tendency in Iberian Romance for intervocalic unvoiced consonants to become vocalized. Voiced means is that if you place your hand on your throat when you say a sound and you can hear you can feel your vocal cords vibrate, that means that it's voiced. For example, B is a good example of a voiced consonant, but P is not. Try that out yourself and you'll pick up what I'm saying here. Now, Latin, like any language, had tons of unvoiced consonants, and many of these unvoiced consonants were intervocalic. They were between vowels. Now, one of the difficulties there is that vowels are almost by definition voiced. Maybe correct me down there in the comments if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty certain that there is no such thing as an unvoiced vowel. Maybe there are some really interesting exceptions that I'm overlooking here. So the difficulty is that if you have an unvoiced intervocalic consonant, you have to move from voicing a sound, unvoicing a sound, and then voicing a sound again. And it seems as though Spanish and Portuguese followed the path of least resistance here. And this is why you have the Latin for wolf, lupus, becoming lobo. That P becomes a B. It moves from this, what I would consider a sort of subjectively weak-sounding plosive to the very strong B, voiced bilabial plosive. So we move from lupus to lobo. We move from vita to vida, or vida in Portuguese. The Latin lacu becomes lago in Spanish, and lago in Portuguese, k to g. Now, there are many more instances of this change. If you can think of any, please comment them down below so that other viewers can have an easy reference to a wealth of vocabulary in Portuguese and Spanish that exemplify this change. But it doesn't just stop there. Spanish and Portuguese took this even further. In many instances where Latin already had a voiced intervocalic consonant, that intervocalic consonant disappeared entirely. This is why Latin credere becomes creer in Spanish and creer in Portuguese. Legere is leer or ler. Pedem for foot, pie in Spanish, and pé in Portuguese. And one of my favorite examples of this, because it's pretty unintuitive, is habere in Latin. Yes, Spanish does have haber, but if you listen very carefully to the way that we pronounce that verb, you'll notice that that b isn't actually really a normal b. It's almost like a stop in between the two syllables. It's pronounced as haber. Its form of voiced quality disappears completely. Now, this is intrinsically interesting on its own because it provides an insight into how Spanish and Portuguese function. But if we widen our search a little bit, it becomes even more interesting. Because, yes, lupus in Latin becomes lobo in Spanish, but in Italian it's still lupo. Spanish may have vida, but Italian still has vita. Contrast this with French, which has lost the consonant completely, V, and the whole pattern gets a lot more interesting. And this is where an intriguing theory from Ramón Menéndez Pidal comes handy. See, Ramón Menéndez Pidal hypothesized, and he was very careful not to posit this as an absolute certainty, but he hypothesized that those Romance languages that had a much stronger Celtic influence tended to undergo this consonant transformation because there was a learned, inherited difficulty with pronouncing these intervocalic sounds in various Celtic languages. Italian would have escaped it because a lot of the sources of modern Italian didn't come from areas as heavily Celticized as the Iberian Peninsula or what is modern-day France. To quote his exceptionally articulate and eloquent Spanish, "Las lenguas célticas se caracterizan por una gran debilidad articulatoria de la consonante intervocálica." Well, I hope you found that interesting and you found that theory particularly intriguing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I hope to see you soon in the next video. For now, I'll say adios and adeus, obrigado y gracias.